I'll make it do. I'll make it do.
Улица будущего вообще.
So we'll talk about future streets, about how technologies transform the world, about what's new normal today. Had someone told me 3 years ago that I would sell my private car and never use it again, I would not believe him. But this is my reality. I'm selling my car. I've been trying to sell it for a week now with little success because I don't need my car any longer. There's car sharing available everywhere. If not, I have options. I have taxis, I have designated lanes for taxis, there's good public transport. Just today, I ordered Dodo pizza that was delivered to me by a drone. That I took a car-sharing car and came here to the Urban Forum. Okay, I was joking about the drone. They don't deliver pizza with drones yet, but it's coming, I'm sure. So we'll talk about future, about where we're going and where we're likely to end up in the near future. We have a very interesting group of speakers. We'll invite them to make their presentations first, and then we'll have an interactive exchange. I would like to invite on stage Kent Larson, who is head of City Science Initiative, basis of MIT. He's working on a lot of projects, and in all his projects, he uses augmented reality technologies, if I'm not mistaken. And also, he works on mobility on demand systems, which will probably be an alternative to privately owned cars. Kent, please come up on stage.
Let's give Kent a round of applause, please. Nice to meet you.
So if I could have my slides first. It's great to be here in Moscow. By the way, this is my first trip to Moscow. Beautiful city, the weather is great. I'm going to talk about future cities and social mobility robots and where I think some of this is heading. Before I do, I want to give you a brief history of cities. All right, so cities began, this is 2900 BC, as compact walkable settlements. You can see that it's very high density inside the inner wall, mass transit connection, food production all around the city. People lived and worked and played in these compact cities. This is medieval Louvain in Belgium, exactly the same diagram. 20-minute walk roughly. Paris the same way. As Paris grew, it became a network of villages, and this is a pattern that existed for literally thousands of years. And then about 1920, and particularly after the war, this is what began to happen to cities. They expanded in a linear way, in a low-density, auto-centric manner. And this is the experience that I had last night in Moscow. This is the beginnings of, I think, where we're heading. I think of it as the third mobility revolution, the first being trams and subways, the second being cars, and the third we're just beginning to hint at, and that's when people come back and are privileged in the street, and you have multiple modes in shared space. And I think it's really critical that we develop a new model for cities. In fact, I think it's a societal imperative, because all of the great challenges that we're facing going forward are best addressed in cities, whether you're talking about climate change, energy, economy, health, food, water, equity, peace, are all best addressed in cities, where almost all of the population growth will take place, almost all of the energy will be consumed in cities, all of the innovation will take place there. So we're beginning to think about this, framing it as cities without. This is not cities with more. Cities with more, or the smart cities movement. Cities without are not doing without, but getting rid of the old, obsolete legacy systems and embracing the new. So we have a whole series of withouts that we're working on. So the first is mobility without cars. I talked a little bit about this if you're in the last session, but I'll do a little more. I think vehicles in the future will be more social mobility robots. In this case, these two young women are standing in the bike lane, and this PEV, this is a little vehicle that we designed, does a little dance around them, and they don't react in a frightened way. In fact, the one woman is smiling, the other one never looks up from her phone. This hints at what is happening with mobility. Now, we're working on a new version of what we call the persuasive electric vehicle. This is to persuade people to get more exercise, to use more sustainable modes, and we're looking at what we think ultimately will be fairly natural interactions between humans and this whole range of mobility robots that will begin to enter the city. So here we're testing this vehicle in Taipei. We have a number of them, and you never know what will happen when you test these things in a living lab context. So this guy just decided to pull in front of the vehicle to see what would happen. Somehow he intuited that the vehicle would respond in a fairly natural way. Now we're also, in addition to building prototypes of these mobility modes, we're doing modeling and simulation to try to understand their impact on the city. This is a cityscope model where one can dynamically change land use and density, tune the diversity of the project. If you add too much density when you're in car mode, the roads go red. You can see there. You can back off the density, they go green, or you can go to lightweight autonomous vehicle modes, the roads go green. You can increase the density. Simple things like this. Now we're using metrics that we're identifying now to put real numbers on the impact of these urban interventions on the city. So this is the radar plot that we're using. Bear with me for a minute. I'm just going to take you through a few of the key features. Density, well, that's different types of density. Density is complex. That's employment density, residential density, third places day and night, cafes, restaurants, cultural facilities, etc. You can map the same thing to diversity. You can have high density residential, but if it's all luxury apartments for rich people, then it's low diversity. So those are two very important indicators. Proximity, how close are all the amenities that one needs in daily life, access to parks and public transportation, or what is the proximity of the available jobs to the available housing and how in sync they are. And then we can, of course, map all that to building energy and mobility energy, both embodied and use energy. And then we take those different parameters and we can map them to environmental impact and social performance, okay? And ideally, we would work towards a 10x improvement in environmental performance and a 10x improvement in social performance. And I think actually, if we bring together the right technology, public policy, and design, these are achievable. So we start with, like I said, mobility without cars. So that has improved on that radar plot in two areas, mobility energy and embodied energy for mobility. Not a huge change. So let's go to rules without zoning. This is looking at algorithmic land use that replaces the old zoning ordinances. So if you make a transition to lightweight mobility modes, that will allow the city to increase the density and have the good that comes without the bad. Now we want to do this though, qualify this increased density for developers with a requirement that they develop in a pro-social way. So that may be contributing to safe bike infrastructure, diverse housing, grocery stores, daycare centers, a lot of things that aren't covered by the market. And you can do this now algorithmically. You can use public ledgers, smart contracts, so they're self-executing, and there's no real limit to how one can do that mapping. And then the radar plots can update in real time. Now in this case, he moved the residential block mapped to luxury housing, and one can see the impact directly on increasing the density of the housing and the diversity of the housing in that area. And as one makes changes, like I said, in land use, in proximity and diversity, toggle on new systems, these radar plots can update in real time. Okay, so we've now improved it a little bit by going to mobility without cars. Now what if we go to rules without zoning, quite a bit more. Housing without rooms. A lot of people wonder what we mean by that. Well, equitable housing is one of the great existential challenges for cities. In fact, it is a requirement to remain culturally and economically competitive in most cities. So we're looking at small apartments that allow people to live large, in effect. So in this case, it's a fairly small micro unit, in this case only about 19 square meters, that dynamically transforms from living to sleeping to working to socializing to cooking, etc. We spun off a company recently called Ori Living, which is now commercializing this. This is an apartment we have downtown Boston where she wakes up in the morning, she has a separate sleeping space, the bed goes away in an auto-magical way, the bedroom collapses, and now she has a big living room. And you can do that horizontally. We're now working on systems that translate vertically. So she wakes up in the morning, she's making coffee, and the queen-size bed disappears, and now she has a living space. Now, this sounds like it might be quite expensive, but we've just announced a collaboration with IKEA to take some of these ideas to scale, and we will be selling systems like this in the IKEA stores coming up in the next year or so, particularly in Asia. So we can bring all of these ideas together in these transformable micro units. We can look at transformable kitchens and living spaces and workspaces. We can do family apartments, elderly apartments. It's all pretty interesting. So back to the cityscope, we can map these new types of housing modules to these three-dimensional cityscope platforms and immediately see the predicted impact on the community. So here, this is where we got to with the rules without zoning. So if you introduce this housing without rooms, everything improves, and you see that alone had almost a 4x improvement on CO2 generation. So that is largely because of the hyper-efficient use of space and because you're bringing more diversity of people into a live-work community. You're increasing the amount of time they can spend exchanging ideas. That has an improvement in social performance. There are many other things that we can look at as well. Finance without banks. What is that? That's looking at fractional ownership and tokenized financing. It's entirely possible that $1 million apartment, which is unaffordable, might be possible if you could come up with the equity for a $500,000 apartment by selling shares of that to other investors. So, of course, if you sell it, you only get 50% of the return. But the finance innovation is actually, I think, incredibly important. Energy without carbon. All kinds of new, exciting, distributed energy systems that can create power without grids. All of this can have a profound impact on the community. So collectively, what we're looking at is something like a 16-fold decrease in a community if you bring these and other innovations together with respect to CO2 generation, and a 10, maybe as much as an 18-fold impact on social performance. Now, we're publishing a document right now with all of these calculations and the assumptions, and of course the assumptions are incredibly aggressive. Any mayor will tell you now that they are impractical in the short term, and they're right. But looking at this over a 10, 15-year period, I think, like I say, it's a societal imperative that we move in this direction. Okay, so we're now looking at large-scale platforms where we can study the impact of these and other urban interventions. This is a large platform we built in Hangzhou, China. And in the lower left, you will see innovation potential, safety, security, social well-being, and even developer profits, because with this platform, you always want to keep the developer in the profit range. So how aggressively can you push some of these systems while still make it work in the marketplace? So just an example of how this might work interactively. So this interface is quite simple: red bad, green good. And we can have layers and layers of visualization. So in this case, there's an area of red which indicates a lack of walkable access to parks from housing. And as she interactively adds park components, you can see it go from red to green. Now we can do the same thing: walkable access to transit stops, walkable access to fresh food, walkable access from jobs to homes, from homes to jobs, really anything we want. And then by looking at layers and layers of these visualizations, one can converge on a system. This, in a sense, is order without planning. We're now working on a new platform. This was just displayed at the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York. And this is a little more of a provocation than a simulation. In this case, there's a slider that one can move back and forth and reveal a future that is dependent on private ownership, indicated in red, and a future that's dependent on sharing systems. And one can move the buildings, increase the density on one side or the other, and what one finds out that almost all the metrics improve by moving towards a sharing society. This was actually quite fun. The kids liked playing with this. But it gave us the opportunity to pull together some of these more serious simulations into a more playful interface where people can learn about some of these issues. Jerusalem is a project we did about 2 years ago. It's a very interesting place if you've been there. It's constrained politically and geographically. The development are on the hills. It's a growing city. They can't grow outwards. They have to grow vertically. But it's very difficult for them to do that because they have terrible problems with traffic congestion and parking. So we looked at a future that would get rid of parallel parking, wide lanes, curbs, parking lots. And how would you do that? You would do that by introducing just a few modes: privileging walking, introducing safe bike lanes, introducing our little three-wheel persuasive electric vehicles that automatically pick up people and drop off autonomously from their point of origin to their point of destination, and dynamically routed autonomous shuttles. So if one does that, you can expand the people space, the cafes, the streetscape, narrow the pathways used for mechanized mobility, add high-density housing, and mobility is key. That unlocks this tremendous potential to increase the density and have the good that comes with density, which are better restaurants, more interaction, greater safety on the street, more innovation potential, without the bad that's normally associated with density, which is traffic congestion and parking problem and noise and pollution and the like. Just very quickly, a project we did in Boston, which was related. Boston was looking at bringing in 4 lanes of bus rapid transit. If you know what bus rapid transit is, it's sort of a hybrid between a subway and a bus. You go through a turnstile, you enter on grade on the bus, it uses a dedicated lane in the city, but it runs above ground. So we built 3 city-scale platforms: the regional scale, community scale, and street scale. At the regional scale, it was a very powerful piece of software, but actually it didn't work very well because it was too complex for use in the community. The neighborhood scale actually worked much better. In the neighborhood, at the neighborhood scale, one could define where the stations were, the data would update in real time, and it was more playful. In that case, we were using Lego bricks to remap the various alternatives, the simulations. And then the station scale was a lot of fun for the kids. These are the stations on either side. We shift to the gold standard station in the center. We replace parallel parking with cars. And each time we did this, projected data would update, and people could make informed decisions about all of these options. So we're presenting these cities without ideas October 1st in Hamburg. You're welcome to attend if you're interested. We're doing this with Sir Norman Foster, one of the great architects of the world, and Nicholas Negroponte. Norman will kick it off, and we will focus the first part of the Cities Without session on World Without Slums. This is also a master class that the three of us are offering this fall at MIT. So stay tuned. Much more to come. Thank you.
Thank you that much. If you don't mind, I switch to Russian.
I will ask the question in Russian. You've had a great slide. It's a great concept, cities without. You've had a great slide with a lot of skyscrapers. And most of the Russian cities look exactly like that. You know, a lot of skyscrapers and things then go.
My Russian is not great.
Okay. Yes, I can translate it. So there was a marvelous slide with lots of skyscrapers in your presentation. And most of Russian cities just look like that. They have lots of skyscrapers. But in some Russian cities, there are no skyscrapers.
Sure.
And they're, I would say, on the first level. They are already cities without.
Yeah.
Does this mean that they already achieved that best level of development, and they should not go into levels 2, 3, 4 and build skyscrapers and then try to remove anything excessive?
Well, it's good for I mean, it's a good question. I don't, you know, skyscrapers doesn't necessarily give you density. It all depends on how it's developed. Cities like Paris, which 5 stories, or Barcelona, which typically 4 or 5 stories, are very high-density cities. I mean, people don't realize how high-density they are. When you take areas that are developed in a low-density, sprawling way and then have areas with very tall towers, people tend to object. So there are lots of ways to achieve density. The cities without concept that we're developing is more about the infrastructure. I mean, I didn't have time to really get into it, but distributed sanitation networks, that could be thought of as sanitation without sewers, or water without pipes, purifying water locally. Mobility without cars is moving away from auto-centric development, embracing all the new mobility modes. Planning without planners, buildings without architects, you see. These are the areas that I think the right combination of public policy and design and technology can facilitate. And I think whether you're developing in a high-density manner like Hong Kong or a fairly low-density manner like you find in most American cities, I think the application of these ideas can be very powerful.
Thank you. Thank you. I know one theory that you cannot miss the layers. I mean, if you're on the level 1, you cannot jump onto the 7th level. So maybe you first need to make all those mistakes. Don't think about planning, build higher buildings, don't think about traffic, and then go to the very best level. Or you can just economize.
Well, I think, you know, cities will do it a lot of ways. I think cities evolve over long periods of time. But I think there are certain urban interventions that can happen very quickly. For example, Uber and Lyft, or in China, Didi, completely transformed the taxi industry almost overnight. So an innovative business model with new technology can have a tremendous impact. It had a lot of negative impact as well. These were very aggressive companies in many cases. But things can happen quickly. I think particularly if you move away from heavy centralized infrastructure to much more lightweight, autonomous, distributed modes. Mobile phones completely replaced, you know, landlines over a very short period of time. I think that's the future. Think of it a little bit like, do you know Moore's law? The exponential increase in computational power. I'd like to see Moore's law applied to sewers and power production. And think of it as kind of a trickle-up process. I really do believe one of the reasons we're focused on slums is I think some of the most advanced technology can be deployed in these areas without conventional infrastructure very quickly when they're proven and robust and cost-effective. Then I think cities like Boston and Moscow will adopt them.
Thank you, Mr. Olsen.
Okay, thank you.
Please stay.
Stay here?
Please stay here,
Okay.
yeah. Ну а теперь.
And now, we are moving on, and I would like to invite to the stage a special speaker who is both he is a scientist, he is an architect, he is an entrepreneur, the ex-chief architect of Barcelona, co-founder of the Catalonia Advanced Architecture. He is the head of the City of Technologies and the Higher School of Economics. At the same time, he is the head of the Great Architects company. He is developing architectural plans and developing plans for buildings. And I'm inviting to the stage Vincent Gouliard to share with us his vision, what awaits us in the future, what will happen to our streets.
I think it's here.
So thank you, Mikhail, for the introduction. And thank you again for the invitation to this event. So I will be talking about public space. The first thing I would like to say is that I am now 4 years here connected with Moscow in the High School of Economics. I am the director of the Shukhov Lab that is in the center, is in the building of the High School of Economics, where our students develop master called Prototyping Future Cities, and where they are working with technology, projects, and learning many disciplines connected to the city. The great news is that we were somehow influenced by the plan on transforming the public space, and we saw in front of us how Mysnitska Street just was transformed from a street full of cars, where the street was mostly occupied by cars that were parked in the street, to a beautiful public space. So Ken was mentioning before something about technology, and we are always imagining that technology is going to change our cities. The self-driving cars, the self-driving minibuses are not still here, but in theory they should change the mobility in cities, because this idea of the sharing car can be at the pool, the fact that many people can go from one place to another using one machine like this. But another interesting topic is that now there are these small, I don't know the English word, but this is becoming now many popular in many cities in Europe. We are having the bike lines, and many people using these kind of tools are moving today in the cities. The funny thing is that this was invented like 100 years ago. So this is Barcelona 1920, where they were testing some of these electrical vehicles, and in the same way Barcelona has 20 factories of cars inside the city. They were electrical cars because the first cars that were invented were electrical. So the idea of putting one engine that is burning something so dangerous that even can explode was an idea that was developed later. And now we are in a moment where we are discussing about coming back to the electrical cars and many things that somehow were invented in the past. So if we follow this idea, maybe the future of the public space will be like the past. Because at the beginning of the process of urbanization, we were making big streets and big avenues, and at the beginning were just horses. There were horses, and there were few people walking. There were trams. The first trams were with horses, but then suddenly start to introduce electrical trams. This is Barcelona again. People used to walk, and people used to take public transportation. So the invention of the industrialization that somehow is connected with the invention of the car has transformed our cities to some model that maybe we should never be there. And then, again, this is Bordeaux. Again, in the cities, mostly people were walking and using public transportation. This is, again, Barcelona. And our vision, and the vision that we have for the future of our cities, is that the future maybe will be like the past. So in the same way that horses are prohibited, they are banned in many cities in the world. 100 years ago, we had only horses. Now they are prohibited, so we think that in the future, private cars will be prohibited. Because we could run a city without private cars. This morning we were listening how Yandex taxi or Uber has transformed this, has transformed mobility in the city. We could imagine that mobility is connected with people walking, taking public transportation, or having some sharing car. This is something could happen, and this is something we are discussing right now. In places in Barcelona, we have the problem that the contamination of the air is so high that we are starting to take or to discuss to take strong decisions about this. And you know something now is, yesterday it seemed that a few days ago in New York, they declared the climate emergency. But you know, they make a declaration with no budget and no legislation. This is a disaster. So it's time to start to talk, stop to talk, and it's time to start to develop projects, transformation, and real things. So I will be talking about projects we did, and I will be connecting what the mayor of Moscow said this morning. You know, this is the Plan of Barcelona that was developed 150 years ago, and it was the origin of the definition of these big streets that we have now in the city. What happened is that in the 1922, for the Olympic Games, we did our last big mistakes. So you said before what we can do if we should stop to do mistakes before to do new things. Our big mistake was to build in what is supposed to be the center of the future of Barcelona, that is this square here. What we did was to build an elevated highway. And this is, you know, a disaster. So that is question, because why? Because we decide to bring the park and ride model and to park and to bring the highway and to park in the middle of the city. So what we were doing only 23 years later is to define a new model, because if we want to make a city that is more livable, walkable, etc., we need really to do a strong transformation. We need to do projects and we need to take decisions. So we developed this project, and basically what we did during my term was to demolish the highway that was built only 23 years ago. So that means that we invest 100 million euros to make the highway, and we spend 20 million euros to demolish. I would recommend any city that is planning to do any highway that maybe put directly 120 million euros doing a park, because this is what will happen when decide not to start to use cars in the center of our cities. So this is the project, and now half of the square is already built. In fact, we are doing a tunnel and we are developing this potential centrality in a park, because if we want to have more livable and green cities, the center should be a good representation of that. This is one of the examples. This is another big avenue, is 50 meters. You can imagine any 50 meters avenue in any of your cities, even here in Moscow. And what we decided was to make huge sidewalks, to put the bikes in the center, to have only 2 lines for private cars, and to have 2 lines for buses. So that means that we are having only like 15% for the private cars, and most of the space, the sidewalks, are huge space for the people for walking, etc. What technology should allow us is to do things like this. So technology is not important at all by itself. What is important is what we can get after we apply some technological principles, the idea of the sharing cars or any other principle like this. This is, you see the kids can play just in front of people's building, or we are doing this process of the so-called renaturalization. We apply also, before we had also some roads and we had some slums in the beaches, and what we did was to clean all this to create public space in front of the beach, and this is one of the more visited places now in Barcelona. Another good example of how to transform the city, the bus lines, we had 120 bus lines, and we had a kind of spaghetti model. It's called the spaghetti model. One day I took a bus in Barcelona and I was lost, because it's impossible to understand how to take a bus to go from where to where. And then many people say, okay, you put a sensor, you could put a Wi-Fi, you could do an application. But the biggest problem, the big mistake that we can do is to apply technology to an obsolete system. Imagine that you have a coal factory. You are making energy emitting CO2. And then you decide to put many technology that you record how many CO2 you are emitting. So you are using technology in the wrong way. What we need to do in many cases is to change the principle. And this is what we did. What we decided was to transform our bus network into a vertical line system and a horizontal line. That means that everyone can understand where you can take a bus and how to go from one place to another place. The interesting thing is that the impact of this system, where the bus lines are every 400 meters, more or less, is that we could transform our system of the traditional grid every 100 meters street to a system what we call the superblocks. That means that we could avoid cars or passing cars in the center of this 500 by 500 grid. And then the direct impact, imagine if we have a city, this is the pedestrian areas of Barcelona today. The easiest thing is the historical center. Today, the mayor was saying that you are obviously now discussing how to apply what you are doing in the center of Moscow to many other areas. So that means that this is easy to do. But what we want to do is to do this, is to transform 70% of the public space into walkable areas. And this is the real revolution. The real revolution is not to have pedestrian areas in the center of the cities. This is what everyone already did. The radical decision is to apply this principle to everywhere. That means to delete the relationship between the center and the peripheria. Peripheria should be killed. The concept of peripheria should disappear, because everyone lives in the center of their own home, on the center of their existence, and it is not respectful to think that someone are better because they live in the center and someone are worse because they live in the peripheria. So that means that applying this principle, what is happening is we are transforming these streets of 20 meters wide with cars and buses and so on to some system where basically we are eliminating space for cars, and the street is becoming a mini forest full of cars with some cars that passing by sometimes. So this is the kind of streets that we are transforming. This is a normal street of Barcelona that used to have 3 lines of cars, and we are starting to eliminate the cars or to have only cars that are entering the residents that are entering this for parking. So that means that this is a normal space of the city, not only the city center. Another thing is that we do this sometimes using what is called the tactical urbanism. So that means is the fast and dirty solution. You should not be waiting to buy all the stone that they put here on granite in the center of the city that is super expensive. You can do fast and dirty solution using, you see, tires, painting, some wood, in order to start to cut and to ban the space for the cars. Because, again, following what your mayor said this morning, the most important thing, in fact, is the vision. He said, we could live without a master plan if you have a vision. And the question is, during many times, I was showing this slide, explaining the traditional city model is decentralized. Big cities like Seoul or LA develop the decentralized model, but the good model for the future is the distribute. Is the difference between internet, that is that one, is the distribute, to the mechanical centralized city. During many times, I was showing Moscow as the biggest sample of super centralized city. The same like Beijing, or the same like Paris, for example. And what I was showing is the model of Barcelona, because what we are doing is exactly this, developing what Ken was saying about the past. I repeat, the future will be like the past. So our model, the good model for the internet age, is that the people walk to work. I repeat, the best ride is the one that you don't take. The best way to go to work is by walking, because you can save a lot of money for your life and for your family's life. So that means that this idea of the 500 meter is based on the idea of having a distributed model of public facilities. In this case, this is the map of Barcelona with the 500 meter radius. But following what your mayor said, he said, we are going to try to develop a model where we will be doing projects for every district as if it were the whole city. And this is exactly what I was doing the last part of my work in the city of Barcelona, because I was developing a strategical vision for the whole city. This is a drawing for a city. The first thing that a city must have is a drawing. It's not a master plan, but the citizens must understand what is their city, how the city looks like. Many times I ask to citizens, please draw your neighborhood. And then they represent what they have in their mind. If you want to have a good change, you need to create the mind, let's say, imaginarium, in order that the people understand what they are doing. So this is the plan or the drawing we did about Barcelona, with many centers, with the 2 diagonals, with the supergrid, etc. But then the next thing we did was to start to, Barcelona is divided with 10 districts, as your mayor said, between 100 to 250,000 people. And what we did was to start to develop projects for every district as if it was a city. So the idea of developing, we developed 10 projects, you see, in every city, in every micro-city, in every district. What we see are the relevant projects that you need to develop in order to transform this area. Because in general, sometimes we are able to look at the big scale, how the cities are, but we are not able to think in the micro scale with the same importance like the big scale. So that means that we were doing this analysis and this catalog of projects that we could apply for the city. For example, some of these ideas, you see, this is an old road in the, let's say, not in the center area of the city. The first initiative is to do tactical urbanist, to occupy the space for the cars and creating more public space for the people. But then following, after doing some projects, we can do some investment, and this is how it will be in the near future. So that means that we have been doing this analysis for the different districts of the city, because the city of the future is a metropolis of neighborhoods. I repeat, the city of the future is a metropolis of neighborhoods. We need to understand the city in a scale of where you live and where the people live. Cities are too big to understand what is a city. It's impossible. I have not been in maybe 80% of Moscow, but I know very well the areas where I live. So that means that every person has their idea. For them, their city is the place that they know and the place where they live. For example, in Moscow, you have like this kind of urban highways, and I know many of them. In fact, you don't have trees in them. We still have some highways that are passing in the center of the city, and what we are doing is to start to transform in some places like this. So that means that we should kill the idea of the suburbia. We should kill the idea of the peripheria. Every place is the center of someone, and that means that we need to do the projects of the city with the same intensity and the same intention as the rest of the city. So look how it looks like. When you are able to go to a deeper, make a zoom, and to look to many different projects, and then you have a catalog of projects. Each project has a budget, and then you can develop with the same intention and intensity any part of the city, because you know you have been looking to the right scale to these places. So Mr. Sivanin this morning did an incredible speech, because I think that this shows incredible leadership. Really, I didn't hear this in America or in many places in Europe, the idea of understanding that the future of the city is to create a metropolis of good neighborhood where every neighborhood has identity and whose good projects and public space. He says something very important that is crucial, the people's implication in that solution. That's true, but there is another important topic, is that you need to do this with data. Because in general, I mean, the UN Secretary General said before very well that projects in the city are done bottom up and top down. There are many cities that are becoming populist and they say, oh, we should promote the discussion with the people, they will take the decision about what we do. Yes, that's true. But we need to have also some experts and some other visions. So, you know, a group of citizens will never invite iPhone. In order to do real inventions, you need to think beyond what you know. And it's great that the people are involved in the decision and in the transformation of the city. And this is what we did in Barcelona. But at the same time, we need to have data. We need to have the right information in order to take the right decision. This is a drawing of Moscow with Habitatum showing the mobility. And that means that the biggest problem of Moscow is not that the people are moving too much, but the biggest problem is that the people are working here and living here. And they are moving because they cannot walk to work. So the future of the cities are cities without private cars and where people can walk to work and where people can enjoy life because they live in a safe and beautiful environment. Thank you.
Thank you that much. From my side, I would say it's a very impressive model when you have a numerous amount of centers in the city, not just one center.
Yeah.
And different places which do attract people to spend weekends. And thank you for this idea, it's really marvelous. My question to you is that one thing that surprised me in Spain is your railways. They're really wonderful. So people can go from one city to another using great train, it's really fast. In Russia, sometimes you have to keep a car.
Yeah.
Because there is, it's the only way to go to a small village in the neighborhood. So people do have lots of cars. As far as I got to your presentation, there is no room for cars anymore. There are trees in the city.
Let me explain.
How can you do
first,
this?
Russia is the biggest country in the world. So then, you know? Yeah. I know. So that means that we need to go, you need to go to many places. And what I say is that cars should be banned in the cities. But obviously, the world is bigger than the cities. That means that the rural areas need to have other forms of mobility. I'm working now with some company here in Moscow discussing about the flying car that I didn't talk. And we say flying cars are maybe dangerous for cities, but obviously will be very good for places that are not so dense. That means communication in places that are not so crowded. So that means that cars will not disappear. Cars in the future will be electrical and maybe self-driving cars. But that means that the solutions that we apply for cities are not the same that we apply for smaller cities or even for villages. I completely support that without villages and without rural life, cities will die. Because we need to have people taking care about territory, producing food. Even many people from the cities will go for weekends outside the city. So that means that the idea of the car will not disappear. What it should disappear is the idea that every time that we want to move from one place to another in the city, we take our car. Because it costs a lot. I mean, we need to waste our public space. Remember the image of the past. Also here in Moscow, the people were walking. Even the kids were playing in the street. We should make cities where we live safe, where the kids can play in the street, and where cities are greener. This is the future, it's not the past, it's the future.
Where do we have to keep our cars? Because right now in Moscow, in other cities, let's say we ought to have the cars. There is no other way to live without car. Where should we keep it in our, like...
Well, you know, I only bought a car when I have a kid. I was doing 15 years without car. When I need a car, I rent it. or that it was much more cheaper. I mean, to own a car is super expensive, by the way. You need to pay the car, the insurance, and you need to park somewhere, and sometimes you need to pay for it. So in a today or transition moment, I would say that it will be much more better to store your car somewhere in the border of the city. This is something that could happen.
It's a great idea. So thank you that much. And please take your stage. Ну а теперь мы переходим.
And now we're moving on, and I would like to invite another great speaker who'll give his vision of how cities of the future will be looking like. He's the head of the Mobility New Cities Foundation, Greg Lindsay, the Senior Fellow, Center for Transportation Policies and Management. As far as I understand, you will share about experiments and what awaits us in the future, a very fantastic future. But what is the street of the future looks like, centralized, decentralized, and what shall we do? Thank you.
Yes, a futurist walks into the street. As a futurist who prefers to walk into a bar, I will keep my remarks brief, particularly after the amazing presentations by Vicente and Kent. I'm going to talk, they talked at the very high level and talked about incredible cities at every resolution. I'm going to focus briefly on a street, a very small street, and how we can transform the street itself. So this is a rendering. I worked earlier this spring with my friend Philippe Chiambretta, who's a Parisian architect, who is competing to redesign the Champs-Élysées ahead of the 2024 Summer Olympics. And this is the rendering we came up with. I was his mobility consultant. And what strikes me about this image is that it's a radical rethinking of the Champs-Élysées, from 8 lanes of traffic to perhaps 4 at most, and yet it's still not radical enough. What strikes me about this when I look at it, it really resembles sort of the best thinking that we've already seen here. It actually reminds me a lot of the stuff and the images I had seen in Barcelona that Vicente had showed. Creating curb cuts where autonomous shuttles might go, reclaiming lanes of traffic and turning them into pocket parks and seating and cafes and those sorts of things. But I wanted to go further. I actually pressed Philippe that we should close the entire street to it, that we should basically reclaim it into a true pedestrian boulevard. And then, once we had done that, how could we then refill the street now that it was space? And, I began thinking about a whole toolkit that we could develop, ways of quickly converting these huge expanses of asphalt that fill our cities into this more usable space. Now, Vicente mentioned tactical urbanism. I was fortunate to actually work in the same office with the man who coined it, Mike Lydon, out of Brooklyn. That's him there in the foreground. And he sort of developed it as a technique of, rather than having to develop master plans and long-range developments, what if we just simply started to create the city we made, guerrilla style? So in this case, I'm from New York. If you go to Brooklyn, you'll see that that certain communities will paint bike lanes overnight, and then the next day another group will unpaint them, and we'll sort of see the street contested. Here, he was working with the city of Burlington, Vermont, to pilot where their potential bike lane network might go. And as Vicente alluded to, using something as simple as a coat of paint and planters, you could sort of create an impromptu bike lane, see how users responded to it, if that was the best particular route, and then basically erase it and start again if it was incorrect. I've also worked on developing sort of new forms of street furniture. So one of the concepts I have is if we begin to close our cities to cars, if we do what Madrid has done, if we do what Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, has proposed of closing the city center of Paris to cars, if Moscow were to go through this, we would suddenly have to fill these streets with something, and then it would suddenly become this incredible canvas for us to develop. So I began to prototype my own form of new street furniture that we could put in our cities. And one of my duties at the New Cities Foundation is Director of Strategy at our Mobility Festival, Commotion. And so the inaugural Commotion was held in the Arts District of Los Angeles in 2017. I worked with my friend Roger Sherman of Gensler, the architecture firm, to develop this new kind of street furniture that just two people, could pick up pieces of it and redeploy it. So there could be an office during the day, or a playground in the afternoon, or other parts of this. And technology companies like Sidewalk Labs have proposed doing this with robots and other sort of high-tech solutions. This was made of reinforced styrofoam. You could literally have two people move pieces of it around and reconfigure it literally every day. And then at the end of the day, or the end of the week when it's done, we put it on a truck and drove it away to another neighborhood of Los Angeles, where it's still being used by the city of Los Angeles to this day. So we can start thinking about how we can use tactical urbanism to redefine the street. We can think about these new types of street furniture to develop it. Gale Architects, which was founded by Jan Gale, Gale, the Danish architect who's famous for bicycles, who inspired the closure of Times Square to traffic, his team out of San Francisco has developed an entire methodology of how we can quickly test, refine, iterate, just like startups do, about how we actually use our streets. And I won't belabor it, but I was part of an experiment they did in 2015 on Market Street in San Francisco, where they developed these new types of street furniture, put them on the street, and we basically saw that people were 700% more likely to stop and linger and talk to people and use that street. So this is a toolkit they developed. And one of the things that Jan Gehl did, by the way, is when he was a younger man and working in Australia in the 1960s, he developed his own nomenclature of how to observe people in public space. He was a one-person human censor who sat down with a notebook and took notes on how people used the plaza and what we could learn from that. And these are the kinds of things I think that are missing. How do we develop more Jan Gehls? How do we develop more people observing how space works? One program that's really interesting is that Ford Motor, the auto company, and IDEO, the creative consultants, have been developing this new idea of what they call the National Street Service. So if you're familiar with America and Smokey the Bear, we have our park rangers with their hats and their brown uniforms who are there to help our citizens who are visiting wilderness. Well, they have proposed the idea of a national street service, of creating a citizen organization that adopts a portion of the street, that watches how people use it and adapt that methodology. And I think that's a really powerful idea of having these citizen bottom-up leaders who could be appointed to oversee our streets. Now, at the same time, there are, of course, various data tools that are being developed for observing streets. This is one called Replica, developed by Sidewalk Labs, basically sort of testing, using Android data from their phones, among other things, to see how people use streets. In Los Angeles, LADOT has developed its own data specification for watching scooters and eventually bicycles, autonomous vehicles, and Uber. A data protocol that forces anybody who uses scooters there to will send and receive data according to its specifications. So the city's getting fine-grained, detailed data about where these devices are. And again, coming back to Gehl, the Gehl folks developed their own data protocol as well, this for observing pedestrians in space. And so this is a partnership they did with Mapbox, for example, of seeing the hotspots of pedestrians inside Central Park in New York. And so we're developing these really fine-grained tools that we can put into the hands of people, whether they're street rangers or someone else, to see how people are using this public space live. So Sidewalk Labs, in this case, they created another app, this called Common Space, which took the Gehl data protocol and developed it into a refined app form. And so you can sort of see here, this is sort of a map of their app in action. And it basically goes to an open data set. So we can learn what works in one place and define it in others. So taking these ideas together, this sort of notion of tactical urbanism and street furniture and street rangers and data, I decided to apply it at perhaps the most inhospitable place I could think of. Earlier this year, I was part of a team that was asked to come to Abu Dhabi, which is investing $3 billion US into the public realm, a whole series of activations of parks and other things to try to make the city, of course, more livable. If you're familiar with the Emirates, they have one of the highest rates of obesity in the world. Obviously, the weather there and the climate is extremely inhospitable. And I was tasked with this portion. This is the part of their port district that they just vacated. They want to create a new creative district similar to, say, the Brooklyn Navy Yard or the Presidio in San Francisco, a ready-made creative place. The problem is that this is what they have. Empty warehouses, huge streets that were designed for cargo trucks that are now sitting empty. And while the other teams focused on what to do with the buildings, and they had lists of consultants who had come up with literally 200 ideas of what to do with the buildings, no one had thought about what should we do with these streets. So I proposed thinking about, well, what could we do with them? How, if we assume that scooters and lightweight mobility is the future, and we just have raw asphalt that we are not going to tear out anytime soon, what could we do? So I thought about perhaps we could deploy new versions of the street furniture that I had designed. And working with groups like TransSolar, which does microclimates, we could think about new forms of shading. They've already started 3D printing out models of different shading devices. But we could think about that to actually start turning the street into a place you might actually linger. We, of course, have this entire methodology then of pop-ups of new forms of this. This shows shipping containers, but another example is the mobility parklet that the Better Block Association in the United States has developed. For $5,000, you can print out of wood using laser cutters and CNC wood milling an entire pop-up parklet that you can design to your specifications. So we could think about these sort of new types of uses. And then thinking about, again, we could use the sort of existing apps or its own data app to basically collect how people are using this. What intersections are proving to be successful? What combinations? What configurations? What doesn't work at all? We should just abandon it rather than let it sit there for months. And then combining all these things, in theory, if it works, We could have these living streets. We could have this notion of streets that can be reconfigured, where no two intersections are ever the same on any given day. And we can have it done either by the citizens themselves picking it up, or we could have this core of street rangers who are in charge of actually deploying it. A new type of either citizen, a public official, or a new type of someone in the city who's in charge of actually measuring the health and defining of these intersections. So with that, thank you very much. We'll see if Abu Dhabi follows through on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you that much. Please take a seat. And my question to you will also be addressed to
all right, should I take a seat?
Yes, okay. Please. You just showed us the very future. It's like data science. You have to measure everything, collect data. And I think what Mr. Larsen showed us is also based on very new technologies. You have to analyze all those streams. But now, let's move from Moscow to one of Russian regions. I would say to any Russian region, which does not have that amount of budget allocated to change cities, and is, by the way, willing that much to change the agenda and to change the cities. What would you recommend? What would be your 3 steps, maybe 5 steps, to completely change the agenda with our cities? And just to remind you, low budget.
Yes. Well, I think I covered some of that in my presentation in my case. I mean, I would think of immediately, what can you do with the assets you have? So you have these streets, you can close them off, you can encourage people to use them. So I would recruit volunteers. Create a culture for the community where the street becomes their playground, where they can feel they can take ownership of it. Don't simply have to set aside government budget for it. The second thing, some of the tools I showed are quite inexpensive. The data tools I showed you, they may be high tech, but they're actually open source. Some of them are apps that anyone can download, and it's simply a question of organizing people to collect the data to see how the street's being used. So that, again, is sort of very inexpensive. And the third piece is as Vicente showed too in Barcelona, a lot of the tactical urbanism things can be done with very little money, whether it's a planter, whether it's using just basic wood to build a little pocket park or build a pocket seating. That can be done very inexpensively as well. And even some of the higher tech versions, like I showed you, cost several $1,000s. I mean, we built one of them for my mobility festival. I mean, that was something we worked with the city to provide budget for, but it could be reused over and over. So I think the combination of tapping citizens, creating a culture around it where they can feel pride in it so that they're willing to invest sweat equity, I think is a really important thing. And then I think, adopting these tools and adopting open source software, if you want the data piece, is a really inexpensive way to go that does not require huge regional tools. And also, of course, starting extremely small. Pilot in very small areas. If it succeeds, go from there. And don't try to do big regional plans or huge networks of bike lanes.
Thank you.
Well, sure, yeah, I would do all that. But these issues are very complicated. There is this giant sucking sound pulling resources and young people out of the heartland of the US and in Europe and in Russia to the major cities, because that's where all the innovation is. That's where the cultural life is, the young people want to experience, where the jobs are, where there's equity for women. And it's a huge challenge. That's what led to Brexit. That's what got Trump elected. That's causing lots of problems all over the world, so we have to deal with it. There's no easy answers, but I would say, first of all, you want to get good internet connection to these places, because without that, you're dead. You want to survey what the assets are that are unique there. So you have cultural assets, physical assets, educational assets, labor assets, and build on that and build the jobs that will keep the young people there, but they're not going to stay there unless you deal with the physical environment. Create places where young people feel comfortable, where they want to live, where there's the bars and restaurants and amenities and good street furniture and good mobility systems. So I think you have to do many things simultaneously. I think, yes, starting small in some cases is good, but sometimes you want to disrupt things. you know, with these strategic, but they could be bigger interventions because you need to break this trend from the center of these, you know, the homeland to the coastal cities that tend to be where people want to live.
Thank you, Vicente.
Yeah, you know, the most difficult thing is to have a vision. The most difficult thing is not to have money. You know, the world is full of money that is looking for visions and is looking for good places to invest. The question is, if you are not able to say very clear what you want to do and how you want to do, then the money will not come. The world is full of money looking for ideas. So the first thing that you need to do is to have a good plan, to have a good idea, what your city or your region want to do, why you are good, why you are better than other places. This is the first thing. The second thing is, obviously, you need to build this with the people and with the entrepreneurs and with the company. The best cities are those where everyone works in the same direction. If the citizens work in one direction, the mayor in another, and the businessmen in another, that's a disaster. Yeah, this is a disaster because then everyone is putting their idea and their time and their money in a different direction. So if everyone is aligned, then citizens, business, and the mayor will push in the same direction. And then you develop the idea. If everyone agree on that, then the third thing you need to do is to put the people work. People will be happy to work in something that they believe is theirs. I mean, the citizens are the owner of the city. Some politics are running it for a time, and then some other people will come, but the people will be there forever. So that means that every time that we have seen asking, let's work together to do something, this can happen. And as we see, about some city transformation can happen just by working people. You know, I have been in Tatarstan, that is near your region, and I have seen the program of parks. The programs of parks is absolutely amazing. When I saw it, I thought in Barcelona, in the 80s, at the beginning of the democratic times, we didn't have money either. And then what we decided was to start to do pocket parks and to start to do things that were good. If you do a small thing that explains very well what you want to do in the future, everyone will understand what you want to do in the future. And if you do this, then the business will follow you and you will attract money. As I say, there is a lot of money in the world. They are looking for a good vision.
Yeah, thank you. I do agree, but sometimes it seems that we have lots of ideas.
But it's bad to have too many ideas, you know?
Yeah,
if you
one
have
direction.
If you have one, it's good enough. If you have one idea, that's enough. But choose a good one, you know? Okay. Choose a good one.
And I think it's right. If you pick the right intervention, it can be small, and you create an optimism and a vision of the future, then you can bring in resources and get people on board, and it can snowball, have a life of its own.
And by the way, I would like to thank Greg for this idea of piloting, so we can do pilot in some places, and to elaborate what you just said, others will join. My last question will be about entrepreneurs. You just mentioned that. There are two ways of interacting with entrepreneurs. In some cases, you can make them change the cities. The second way is to make them willing to change the city. So how to make them eager to change the cities. So based on your experience, do you have to make them change the cities or make them involved into this process, if you understand what I mean?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I mean, when you say make or evolve, it's interesting to watch. So, you know, Uber and Lyft came up. Uber, I think Ken mentioned earlier. I mean, it's been interesting. Mobility is my sort of a core area of research. And, you know, and I predicted in 2015 or doing research on this that Uber would be detrimental to public transport and would add congestion to it. And we have the data now and see that if left to run roughshod, the individual convenience they provide, the service they give to their customers only, is detrimental to the city as a whole because, of course, they're not beholden to all of the citizens in the city. So I think, and cities are coming around to this now. I showed Los Angeles as an example of this, you know, I agree, cities move slowly, government moves slowly. That does not give you a remit to wreck anything in your path as an entrepreneur. But cities are finally coming around and understanding that they can create these, you know, either a software platform to create frameworks of engagement, whether it's accelerators, incubators, new RFP proposals. Cities are finally getting wise to the notion of if we offer the right touch points, we can channel them to to fulfill our public policy goals rather than just them going into that. And I think they still have to crack down. I think there's still a number of startups, very large ones like Airbnb that still would rather sue a city than work within a city's guidelines. So yeah, so I think the number of entrepreneurs who understand that it's better to play with the city and solve their problems and make a lot of money doing it, that has increased. But yeah, there's still a number of disruptors around, but I think cities need to figure out how to work with them or at least bring them to heel.
Thank you. Kent?
Yeah, I think it's an important challenge. I mean, entrepreneurs are absolutely essential to bring change very quickly. They're agile. They know the technology. They can develop new business plans, et cetera, et cetera. But they think about return for their investors. It's not in their business model to create better communities, for example. Whereas governments, that's their mission. And I think the smart governments are realizing that they have the power to set kind of high-level rules of the game that will still allow the entrepreneurs to take their innovation to scale, but develop in a more pro-social way. And in between these two worlds, there's this new class of investing, social impact investing, where there are investors, typically high net worth individuals that really want to return to the community, that are looking for those investments that are pro-social.
Thank you. Vicente?
Yeah, again, if we imagine how much money there is in the cities, you pay the power, the lighting, the water, transportation, the food, the clothes. So that means that to run a city, running a city means moving a lot of money. The question is, until now, we understood the economy of cities about buying and selling products, buying and selling cars, buying and selling apartments. I say that many times in many developers that I found, their economical model is to build cheap, to sell expensive, and run away. This is the traditional developer. He's not putting value. They are taking the value with them. The business of the future is to stay, is to run the business, to run the life, and the economy of information is an economy of services. So that's why we are talking more about to pay per use for mobility, not to buy a car. This is Uber and Yandex and others. So I would say that another challenge is that if we give the big players all the business, we are gone. If Yandex, Google, Facebook take all our money, we are gone, because then there will be few people that will be running the world. And this is what is happening in the economy today, that the presidents of the company move more money than the presidents of the countries or the mayors of the city. And then what is the solution? Is to push for entrepreneurship. So part of the objective of your city or many cities or regions will be to let the developers, entrepreneurs to invent the future. Because, as I said, there is a lot of economy moving in the city. We should allow them and to promote them and to help them to develop the business of urbanity. Before, the entrepreneurs were only about digital applications. But now the entrepreneurs came to the physical world. And now that's why we have self-driving cars, the drones moving up and down, delivering food, growing green food. There are many things connected with the cities that can be done by entrepreneurs.
You can make them your allies. You can get them into your team.
In your team, you need to find young people working with you, letting them make business, helping them to grow, and maybe you will get an unicorn that will be based in your city. And then your city will be rich.
One thing that I think cities underappreciate in many cases is they control vast amounts of wealth. Not revenue that comes to them, but through their land use regulations and their licensing, et cetera. Trillions and trillions of dollars. And if you can, like real estate developers, if you can create incentives through increased FAR or other incentives for real estate developers to develop in ways that improves the health and functionality of a community, and all of them are playing by the same rules, they'll all love it because the property values for everyone goes up and they'll make more money. That requires really creative uses of advanced technology because it's too complicated to do manually. You need to do it more algorithmically, and I think that'll be the next trend. Technology, sure, embedded in the city or in vehicles, that's important, but technology for design and governance is, I think, the next wave of creative activity.
Great. So, thank you. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Kent. Thank you, Vicente. Мне кажется, что у нас сегодня...
Well, I think we had a very interesting interactive discussion. A lot to take home for each and every one of us. I was taking notes. Cities without. It's a very interesting concept. What is it we don't need in our cities today any longer? The decentralized cities is a second notion which struck me. Not just one point of attraction, not just one center, just as it happens in some cities. Some cities have 0 points of attraction. But thinking of making each district a point of attraction, and active use of data. The 360 analysis of everything that's happening in the city, from social media to transportation flows. This is what we can and should do now. So I guess we have quite a roadmap we can use and we will use. Thank you very much.